I never could have pictured my peaceful retirement years as governor concluding with an HOA leader attempting to seize my residence of 5 decades through a large-scale deception. However, once they demolished my late wife's memorial bench and attempted to clear my rose garden in the dead of night, I had to consider what would unfold if they realized they had targeted the incorrect retired governor. Welcome, and I encourage you to subscribe for further HOA narratives. The knocking on my front entrance startled me awake at precisely 7 a.m. I was already weary from the previous night's extended budget discussions at the governor's mansion, but it appeared someone had different intentions for my Sunday. Upon opening the door, I encountered Jessica Miller, our recently appointed HOA president, impatiently tapping her foot with that characteristic expression of censure on her face. "Governor Thompson, your rose bushes exceed the regulation height by 3 inches, she declared, brandishing her tape measure as if it were a dangerous item. "This constitutes your 4th infraction this month." I glanced beyond her at my wife, Elizabeth's cherished rose garden, the sole item I'd vowed to maintain following her passing from cancer the prior year. For 49 years, she had nurtured those roses each morning while I enjoyed my coffee on the veranda. Presently, they were seemingly an offense against our community. "Jessica," I stated in a composed manner, "those roses have been present since 192. The HOA wasn't even established until 1990. She adjusted her stylish shades and shoved a document into my grasp. "Revised regulations were enacted last month. You ought to participate in the meetings if you wish to influence matters. Your status as governor doesn't grant you special privileges here." I restrained myself from mentioning that I'd been absent from the meeting due to managing a state crisis. Instead, I observed her stride across my grass, tape measure still in hand, to pester Robert Davis regarding the hue of his mailbox. Later that afternoon, while organizing my correspondence, I discovered an unusual item, a letter marked "Current Occupant," rather than bearing my name. Inside was a notice of eviction, asserting I had 30 days to depart the premises. My hands began to tremble. This had to be an error. I immediately contacted Robert, my neighbor of 3 decades, and a member of the original HOA board. "Hello, did you receive any peculiar correspondence today?" "John, I'm relieved you contacted me." Robert's voice conveyed urgency. "I just observed your residence advertised for sale on a real estate website, posted this very morning." My stomach plummeted. "That's inconceivable! I possess full ownership of this house." "Well, someone holds a differing opinion. The listing agent is Miller Realty Group, Jessica Miller." The components began to align. Her persistent criticisms concerning the roses, the abrupt introduction of new regulations, the eviction notice. This wasn't about landscape rules at all. I dedicated the subsequent hour to thoroughly examining my home office, seeking the original deed. Upon finally locating it within Elizabeth's aged filing system, another item emerged, a handwritten note from her, previously unseen by me. "My dearest John," it commenced, "if you are perusing this, something has gone awry with the house. Inspect the base of my rose garden, the 3rd shrub from the left. I interred duplicates of all our vital documents there, enclosed in a waterproof container. You consistently teased me about my excessive document meticulousness, but I sensed we would require them at some point." Even in her absence, Elizabeth continued to safeguard our home. I procured a digging tool and proceeded to the garden, unconcerned that I remained in my suit from yesterday's engagements. As I excavated beneath her beloved Tranquility Rose, I overheard Jessica's voice emanating from the neighboring property. "Of course, it's permissible." She was conversing with someone on her phone. "The electronic conversion caused some discrepancies in ownership records, and we are merely rectifying them. By the time anyone discerns the situation, the transaction will be concluded." She emitted a chuckle. Even the governor is powerless against the local authorities. My shovel struck a solid object. Within the metallic container, I discovered precisely what we required: our original deed, land surveys, and every HOA document we'd ever executed, including one from 1990 that explicitly safeguarded our pre-existing garden. I peered upward, observing Jessica watching me from across the boundary, her phone conversation momentarily abandoned. For a brief instant, her composed facade faltered upon noticing the container in my possession. Subsequently, she pivoted and hurried towards her residence, already dialing another number. The sun was descending behind my residence of 5 decades, projecting elongated shadows through Elizabeth's roses as I grasped our property records. I comprehended this was no longer solely about preserving our dwelling. How many additional homes had Jessica rectified during the digital conversion? And more crucially, how had she failed to recognize that a former governor might possess some knowledge regarding fraud investigation? I retrieved my phone and contacted Patrick Smith, our state prosecutor. Patrick, recall your mention of seeking a substantial case against real estate deception? I believe I've encountered something intriguing in my own vicinity. I overheard Jessica's voice once more, now yelling into her phone regarding urgent HOA gatherings and document disposal. But for the initial time all day, I expressed a smile. Elizabeth had perpetually asserted our quaint Victorian residence had selected us for a particular purpose. Perhaps she was accurate. I couldn't find rest after discovering that eviction notice, prompting me to descend to my cellar where I maintain all my crucial documents. My hands trembled as I retrieved the aged metallic container Elizabeth and I had acquired upon our initial move-in. Inside resided our original deed from 1974. The parchment yellowed with age, yet still entirely legible. Adjacent to it lay 5 decades of property tax documentation, each meticulously archived by my Elizabeth. She had always possessed an organized nature. The sound of a car door shutting caused me to peer upward through the cellar window. An upscale realtor's vehicle had parked in front of my residence. My neighbor, Robert Davis, was sprinting across his lawn in his sleepwear, attempting to dissuade them. I hastened upstairs and opened my front entrance just in time to hear the realtor state, "The open house is arranged for this weekend." "There must be some misunderstanding," I asserted, still clutching my aged deed. "I never authorized the sale of my home." The realtor presented a perplexed expression and retrieved her electronic tablet. "According to the county records, this property was recently listed by the Valley Creek HOA." She rotated the screen towards me, and my heart nearly ceased beating. There was my residence, advertised for $850,000, accompanied by photographs I'd never previously encountered. I immediately contacted my longtime acquaintance, Patrick, at the county records office. While awaiting his file check, I perused more of my documents. That's when I discovered something peculiar. A notification from 6 months prior regarding the HOA's record modernization. Jessica had emphasized the transition to paperless records, claiming it would enhance efficiency. I hadn't paid significant attention at the time, preoccupied with a state budgetary challenge. Robert arrived with his laptop, possessing considerable computer expertise, far surpassing my own. Together, we examined the HOA's new online system. My stomach plummeted upon discovering my property record. According to their database, I had transferred my deed to the HOA during the digital conversion, yet I had never signed any such document. "Observe this," Robert indicated, pointing to his display. He'd identified 5 additional residences in our neighborhood with comparable transfers, all belonging to long-term residents. All of them had received grievances from Jessica regarding their landscaping or paint hues in the preceding year. At that moment, Patrick contacted me. "Governor," he stated, his tone grave, "something is amiss here. The digital deed bears a signature date from 3 months ago, but according to my records, you were delivering a speech at the Capitol on that date. I am currently viewing the video. My security personnel contacted me next. They'd observed an individual photographing my residence. Upon investigation, the person claimed to be measuring for renovation work authorized by the HOA. I hadn't sanctioned any renovations. I was documenting all this when I received an electronic message from Jessica. Just a reminder that the HOA possesses complete authority to uphold community standards. The prospective purchasers this weekend are a delightful young couple who comprehend the significance of appropriate lawn maintenance, unlike some of our present occupants. The elements were beginning to coalesce, and I was displeased with the emerging picture. Jessica's realty firm, managing all the HOA's transferred properties, the abrupt grievances against long-standing residents, the enigmatic digital conversion my years in politics had trained me to recognize a deception, and this bore all the hallmarks of one. A movement caught my attention through the window. Additional vehicles were pulling up outside. Through the gathering darkness, I could observe Jessica directing individuals with clipboards towards my front porch. She glanced upward, noticed me observing, and bestowed upon me that identical smirk she'd displayed at the prior week's HOA gathering when she'd complained about my garden hose being visible from the street. My phone vibrated. A text message from Susan Thomas, the HOA secretary. "Governor, please inspect your email. There's something you need to see regarding the records transfer, but do not inform Jessica I sent it. The emergency HOA gathering was overflowing with anxious neighbors. Upon my arrival, I hadn't donned my customary suit and tie. I attended in my gardening attire, soil still fresh on my knees from tending to Elizabeth's roses one final time." Jessica's face reddened upon observing my casual dress. She had always detested my continued gardening endeavors, even after my gubernatorial appointment. I took my seat in the front row, placing my aged leather briefcase on the floor. Inside was every document demonstrating my homeownership since 1973. My neighbor, Robert, sat beside me, offering a supportive squeeze on my shoulder. The room buzzed with whispers. No one had ever witnessed such an abruptly convened emergency meeting. Jessica stood at the podium in her crimson blazer, tapping her manicured nails on the wood. "Governor Thompson," she uttered my title as if it were something unpleasant. "I presume you are present to discuss the property matter." She smiled, that artificial smile I'd observed too frequently when she'd voiced complaints about my garden hose being visible from the street. "You could say that," I responded, maintaining a steady voice, as Elizabeth had instructed me during my inaugural campaign. "I am here regarding your attempt to sell my residence without my consent." The room fell so silent, one could hear the air conditionings hum. Jessica's smile broadened, becoming more menacing. She retrieved a substantial stack of documents from her designer handbag. "Actually, according to our new digital record system, you haven't owned that property since last year's database update." I stood up gradually, my knees exhibiting a slight creak. "Jessica, I've resided in that house for 5 decades. I possess every document since 1973, right here." I patted my briefcase. "You cannot simply input something into a computer and claim my home as your own to sell." "Oh, but I can?" She brandished her documents. "You see, when we updated our systems, we discovered several discrepancies. Your property was not appropriately registered under the new HOA guidelines. Consequently, ownership has reverted to the association." The neighbors commenced murmuring. Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street stood up. "That's preposterous. JS has resided there longer than anyone." Jessica struck her gavel. "The regulations are the regulations. If you do not appropriately register your property during a system update, you forfeit your rights. It's all delineated in Section 47B of the new bylaws." That's when I smiled, reaching into my briefcase. "Intriguing that you mention those new bylaws, Jessica. I possess here the original HOA agreement from 1980. It explicitly states that any modifications to registration requirements necessitate approval by a 75% vote of homeowners. I retrieved another document. And observe what I discovered in the county records. No such vote ever occurred. Jessica's face paled. She shuffled through her documents more rapidly. That's immaterial. The digital transition overrides the law. That it does not, a profound voice interjected from the rear. Patrick Smith, my longtime acquaintance and state prosecutor, stood up. Because I would be exceedingly interested in understanding how a computer database supersedes 5 decades of lawful property records. Jessica's hands began to tremble. This meeting is adjourned. She grasped her documents, but in her haste, one fluttered to the floor. Robert retrieved it before she could snatch it back. Hey, this is a sales contract dated 3 months ago. Robert's voice ascended in astonishment. You've been attempting to sell John's house since January. The room erupted. Jessica retreated from the podium as neighbors commenced shouting inquiries. Amidst the turmoil, I observed her retrieve her phone, fingers swiftly navigating the screen. Later, we would discover she was deleting electronic messages, unaware of the backups Susan had already secured. Jessica, I stated, my voice cutting through the cacophony. I believe you should be aware that I just signed an executive order this morning establishing a state task force on housing fraud. Would you care to guess who is leading it? She fled towards the door, high heels clicking on the tiled floor. But Patrick was quicker, and 2 law enforcement officers were already awaiting her in the lobby. I witnessed her designer handbag fall to the floor, spilling additional documents that would lead us down an unforeseen path. Robert picked up the gavel Jessica had abandoned. I motion for an immediate vote to remove Jessica Miller as HOA president. All in favor? Every hand in the room ascended, but somehow I knew this was merely the commencement. I sat in my study, examining the walls of evidence we'd amassed against Jessica. Something remained incongruous. The paper trail was excessively disorganized for someone as meticulous as her. That's when Susan Thomas, our HOA secretary of 15 years, knocked on my door, tears welling in her eyes, and a USB drive clutched in her trembling hand. Governor Williams, I can no longer sleep at night, she whispered, closing the door behind her. Jessica didn't solely target your residence. There's so much more. My security personnel scanned the USB drive before I connected it to my computer. What we discovered chilled me to the core. Spreadsheets, property records, fabricated documents, all meticulously organized by date and neighborhood. Jessica hadn't merely altered my property records. She'd been gradually seizing homes throughout the entire county. I contacted Robert Patterson, who resided next door to 3 vacant houses Jessica's company had recently acquired. He arrived promptly, accompanied by his daughter, Sarah, a data analyst who'd been harboring suspicions about the neighborhood's property records for months. Observe this pattern, Sarah indicated, pointing to her laptop screen. Each target is either elderly, too occupied with work to notice the paperwork alterations, or residing out of state. Jessica's company intervenes, alleges HOA infractions, then abruptly discovers ownership issues. Susan's hands quivered as she displayed additional files. I commenced maintaining records when she initially joined the HOA board 5 years ago. Initially, it was merely peculiar occurrences, altering meeting minutes, misplacing complaint forms from specific homeowners. Then I observed property documents vanishing from our files. Robert paced my study, his countenance growing increasingly flushed. Remember the Andersons? Resided here for 4 decades. Jessica asserted they'd consented to sell their house due to HOA infractions. They relocated to Florida last year, heartbroken. I retrieved my phone, but Susan grasped my arm. Wait, there's more. Jessica possesses an entire network. Real estate agents, contractors, even someone at the county records office. They're all complicit. Sarah displayed another document that caused my heart to plummet. A list of prospective targets. 30 additional homes in our neighborhood alone. Adjacent to each address were notations regarding the owner's vulnerabilities. Next to my name, it stated, "Too preoccupied with state duties to notice alterations. Wife deceased. Emotional attachment to property renders appropriate legal review improbable." They'd been scrutinizing us, learning our weaknesses, exploiting our lives against us. I contemplated my rose garden, the one Elizabeth had assisted me in planting upon our initial move-in. Jessica hadn't targeted it due to HOA rule violations. She targeted it because she knew it would distract me with sorrow and fury while she labored to seize my home. Susan displayed electronic messages revealing Jessica's subsequent maneuver. She intended to present evidence at the following week's HOA gathering that several additional residents had failed to appropriately transfer their deeds during the digital conversion. It would appear as a mere clerical oversight requiring rectification. "The thing is," Sarah stated, pointing to her screen, "I verified the original county records. None of these ownership alterations underwent appropriate legal channels. Jessica has been generating parallel paperwork that appears official but is not properly registered. She's relying on no one inspecting the actual county records." As we delved deeper, Robert discerned something peculiar about the dates. Every attempted property seizure occurred during significant state events, when you'd be too engrossed to attend to neighborhood drama. I reclined in my chair, finally comprehending Jessica's complete strategy. She hadn't merely been pilfering homes. She'd been constructing an empire directly beneath our awareness, exploiting our trust in the HOA system against us. The question was no longer solely about rescuing my home. It was about halting her before she annihilated our entire community. Susan stood up straighter, her apprehension transforming into resolve. "I possess duplicates of everything, Governor. Every electronic message, every fabricated document, every clandestine meeting recording. I've been preserving them for years, awaiting someone sufficiently robust to challenge her." I surveyed the countenances surrounding me. Susan's determination, Robert's righteous indignation, Sarah's analytical concentration. Jessica might possess financial resources and connections, but we possessed veracity and community on our side, and she was about to discover that tampering with individuals' homes was a perilous endeavor, particularly when one of those individuals wielded the complete authority of the governor's office. Sarah's laptop emitted a notification chime with a new alert. Jessica had just convened an emergency HOA gathering for the following evening. We exchanged glances, cognizant that this was it. The time for amassing evidence had concluded. Now we had to determine, did we unleash our trap, or was Jessica about to unleash hers? I was preparing for bed when my phone vibrated. It was Robert, his voice tremulous. "They're here with earth-moving equipment!" I rushed to my window and observed the yellow machines advancing up my street like colossal beasts in the darkness. My security personnel were already mobilizing, their flashlights piercing the night as they encircled 3 individuals in construction attire. "The HOA president granted us authorization," one worker asserted, brandishing a document that appeared legitimate. But I knew better. I'd been authenticating official documents as governor for years. Even from my window, I could discern this one was counterfeit. My hands trembled as I contacted law enforcement, but my voice remained composed. I'd acquired that technique from years of managing state crises. While awaiting their arrival, I accessed my laptop and commenced live streaming everything from my security cameras. If Jessica desired to engage in unethical tactics, she'd have to do so with the entire internet observing. The police arrived within minutes, their sirens silent but lights ablaze. Officer Rodriguez, who'd grown up in this vicinity, examined the paperwork and shook his head. "This authorization is post-dated for next week," he stated, suppressing a smile. Jessica hadn't even bothered to verify the dates when she forged it. I believed that would conclude the matter. I was mistaken. The subsequent morning, while my security detail was changing shifts, something caught my attention through the kitchen window. Jessica stood beside Elizabeth's memorial bench, phone in hand, conversing with someone. Before I could reach the exterior, she was gone. But what she left behind inflicted more heartbreak than any earth-moving equipment could. Elizabeth's exquisite bench, where she used to narrate tales to our grandchildren, lay in fragments. The bronze plaque bearing her name was absent. Our cherished quote about affection and roses was obliterated. 5 decades of recollections shattered, akin to the marble remnants dispersed across my lawn. I heard Robert's back door slam. He was already sprinting over with his phone, recording everything. Susan from across the street joined us, weeping upon observing the devastation. "I captured it all on my security camera," she stated, displaying the footage on her phone. "Jessica perpetrated this herself not even an hour ago." But then Susan gasped, zooming in on her screen. In the background of her footage, barely discernible behind Jessica's shoulder, was a man I recognized. The identical developer who'd been attempting to acquire the entire block for years. They were both examining documents, pointing at various residences on our street. My security personnel discovered 3 additional concealed cameras installed around my property, all linked to an unidentified IP address. Jessica hadn't merely been harassing me. She'd been studying my timetable, learning when the house was least safeguarded. I sat in my garden, surrounded by the fragments of Elizabeth's bench, and felt a transformation within me. Jessica was unaware of the concealed camera in Elizabeth's aged birdhouse, the one I'd never had the fortitude to remove, or about the GPS tracker my security team had discreetly affixed to her vehicle after the initial threats commenced, or that her phone had been automatically connecting to my property's guest Wi-Fi, logging every visit. As I gathered fragments of marble, my phone illuminated with messages from neighbors sharing their own security footage. Jessica had been occupied the previous night, affixing condemnation notices on every residence owned by someone over 60. But she'd committed a significant blunder. The notices bore the official state seal, my seal. I gazed at the shattered remnants of Elizabeth's bench, recalling how she perpetually asserted that everything occurs for a purpose. Perhaps she was accurate. Jessica believed she was obliterating evidence. Instead, she'd provided me with precisely what I required to halt her: substantiation she was impersonating state authorities. That evening, as I observed the sunset gild my roses, my phone vibrated with an alert from my security system. Jessica was back, this time accompanied by an entire team of individuals in suits. But upon noticing the state police vehicles parked discreetly along the street, her countenance altered. She finally comprehended the consequences of her avarice. She hadn't merely initiated a conflict with an elderly gentleman who cherished his garden. She had declared war on a governor who possessed expertise in combating such situations. The morning commenced with sirens, not the customary ones associated with my security detail, but the resounding ones signifying serious matters. I was savoring my morning coffee when 3 state police vehicles arrived at Jessica's residence across the street. My neighbor, Robert, hurried over, still clad in his bathrobe, nearly spilling his own coffee. "You won't believe what Susan just transmitted me," he stated, displaying his phone. The HOA's financial records were exhibited, revealing monetary transfers to offshore accounts. Jessica hadn't merely been pilfering homes. She'd been operating a full-fledged criminal enterprise. I observed from my porch as Jessica emerged, still attired in her designer sleepwear and the pearl necklace she perpetually boasted about. Even now she held her head high, as if she owned the entire neighborhood, The officers recited her rights while she stood there, hands cuffed behind her back, her flawless coiffure becoming disheveled in the morning breeze. "This is preposterous!" she shrieked, sufficiently loud for the entire street to hear. "Do you comprehend my identity? I am acquainted with Senator Thompson." That elicited a chuckle from me. Thompson had lost his seat the previous year following his own scandal. Neighbors began emerging from their residences, some still in bathrobes, others attired for work but too inquisitive to depart. Mrs. Johnson from number 42 brought out her phone, recording everything. Her hands trembled. Jessica had threatened to fine her the previous month for possessing a wheelchair ramp deemed unsightly. The state investigator, Agent Rodriguez, approached to brief me. 3 counties, 17 neighborhoods, and over 40 homes targeted, all adhering to the identical pattern. Digital records enigmatically altered, abrupt eviction notices, rapid sales to Jessica's real estate company, and substantial profits from flipping the properties. Governor, Rodriguez stated, handing me a voluminous folder. "Your residence wasn't the initial one, but it will be the final one. We discovered evidence spanning 5 years. Some victims lost everything." A news van arrived, Channel 5, followed by another from Channel 9. Jessica observed them and abruptly altered her demeanor. "Governor Williams orchestrated this entire affair," she screamed, mascara streaming down her face. "He's attempting to discredit me prior to the election, inquire about the inducements." I remained on my porch, composed as could be, consuming my coffee. The reporters glanced at me, then at Jessica being loaded into a police vehicle, then back at me. They knew whom to believe. 2 decades in public service had imparted one lesson. The truth invariably emerges. Susan arrived bearing boxes of documents. She appeared fatigued, but proud. "I've been amassing evidence for months," she informed the officers. "Every fabricated document, every altered record, every illicit sale." Jessica believed no one would notice because she solely targeted older residents who might not scrutinize their digital records. Additional police vehicles arrived. They were proceeding to Jessica's real estate office downtown. Robert squeezed my shoulder. "Elizabeth would be proud," he stated softly. "Recall how she always said your tenacity would ultimately prevail." The investigation was proliferating rapidly. By noon, we learned Jessica's company had affiliations with comparable schemes in 2 other states. The FBI was becoming involved. My phone perpetually rang with calls from other governors, senators, even the Attorney General. Jessica's final words before the police car door closed pertained to my impending re-election campaign. She believed this was entirely about politics. She never comprehended that certain things possess greater significance than power, such as home, community, and rectitude. I gazed at my rose garden, at Elizabeth's shattered memorial bench, at our residence of 5 decades. A youthful reporter approached, microphone poised, inquiring about my campaign intentions. I smiled, contemplating the retirement documents reposing unsigned on my desk at the Capitol. Jessica had presumed I was striving to retain my gubernatorial position, but as I observed her being driven away, I comprehended this was never about remaining in power. The genuine question was, how many additional Jessicas were present, believing they could prey on virtuous individuals merely seeking to reside peacefully in their homes? Tomorrow, I would deliver my significant announcement at the Capitol, but today, I had roses to nurture and a memorial bench to reconstruct. The morning sun illuminated my face as I knelt in my rose garden, meticulously planting a new Elizabeth's Love rose bush. My hands weren't as steady as they once were, but each blossom I planted felt like a minor triumph. Robert Patterson, my neighbor of 3 decades, approached with 2 steaming cups of coffee. Never envisioned I'd witness the day Jessica Miller would end up incarcerated, Robert stated, handing me a cup. The news is labeling it the most extensive real estate fraud in state history. I smiled, recalling how this entire situation originated with a seemingly insignificant rose garden dispute. The media trucks had finally departed my driveway yesterday, after encamping for 3 consecutive weeks. It turns out people appreciate narratives about corrupt HOA presidents attempting to seize the governor's residence. Susan Thompson joined us, bearing a substantial folder. As our newly appointed HOA president, she'd been laboring diligently to rectify the chaos Jessica left behind. "You won't believe what we discovered in the aged records," she stated, seating herself on Elizabeth's newly constructed memorial bench. Jessica attempted the identical scheme in 3 other neighborhoods prior to relocating here. She'd target elderly residents, tamper with property records during technological upgrades, then compel rapid sales through her company. My security detail, Mike, arrived with his morning report. "Sir, we've identified 28 additional victims across the state. The FBI is now involved," he paused, then added, "and Mrs. Miller is endeavoring to negotiate a plea bargain with the prosecutors." I shook my head, recalling Jessica's expression upon her arrest. She'd shrieked about conspiracy theories and threatened to expose my corrupt administration. What she never grasped was that I'd dedicated my entire career to combating individuals like her, individuals who believed regulations were inapplicable to them. The neighborhood children cycled past, waving at Governor Bill as they traversed. One of them, little Annie from 2 doors down, paused to present me with a hand-drawn card. Inside was an illustration of my rose garden with the inscription, "Our Hero," in crayon. My phone vibrated. Another message from the state attorney general. They desired my testimony at Jessica's trial the subsequent month. I contemplated declining, contemplating merely savoring my retirement in tranquility. But then I gazed at Elizabeth's bench, recalled how Jessica's henchmen had demolished the original one, and knew I had to see this through. Robert assisted me in rising, my knees creaking in protest. "You know what Elizabeth would say about all this?" he inquired with a knowing smile. "She'd laugh heartily," I replied, touching the smooth wood of her new bench. "Then she'd instruct me to cease fretting and plant additional roses." Susan spread out some documents on the bench. "Observe these newly drafted HOA bylaws. Complete digital transparency, triple verification for property record alterations, and mandatory resident voting on significant decisions." She indicated a particular section. "We're designating it the Thompson Rule." I felt tears welling up, but blinked them away. Elizabeth always said crying was merely the heart's method of irrigating hope, and presently, hope was blossoming throughout our neighborhood. Families who'd lost their homes to Jessica's scheme were returning. The community was mending. As the morning progressed, additional neighbors stopped by. Each possessed a narrative about Jessica's intimidation, about feeling powerless against her machinations. But now, they also possessed narratives of triumph, of equity, of community unification. My rose garden had become an emblem of resisting corruption, one blossom at a time. I gazed at my residence of 5 decades, its Victorian allure undiminished despite Jessica's utmost endeavors to seize it. Occasionally, the most substantial conflicts commence in the most diminutive locales. A garden, a bench, a home. And occasionally, simply refusing to yield can alter everything. Standing there with my neighbors, observing the roses capture the morning light, I comprehended this wasn't solely about preserving my house anymore. It was about safeguarding the places and individuals we cherish, about resisting bullies who believe they are above the law. I retrieved my gardening implements, prepared to plant another rose bush. After all, I had numerous additional blossoms to plant and a community to reconstruct.